Hello and welcome to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and today I'm happy to have on the show Jonathan Schwartz, who's a McKinsey alum, member of Umbrex. We're going to be talking about how to analyze a manufacturing company. And this ties into a resource that Umbrex has published on the website. It's free. You can find it if you go to umbrex.com/resources and just do Control F for how to analyze a manufacturing company. You can get this resource and follow along. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Will.
So, Jonathan, maybe before we dive in, I know you've prepared to walk through some of the analyses. The resource has 47 different analyses that someone might do on a manufacturing company. Walks through, the data required, step-by-step instructions, what to do with the information, how to improve on that metric. You're going to talk through just a handful of those. Before we get started, though, just give us a little bit of an overview of your background and where you've worked and the type of work that you do now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my whole career's been in operations improvement, and it started out in manufacturing. I was an industrial engineering undergrad at Stanford and worked at Hewlett-Packard, helping them consolidate a couple factories and doing a lot of lean improvements, although it wasn't actually called lean at the time yet. And after a manufacturing graduate program at MIT, I went to Motorola for 4 years, and everything from helping them to reduce their product development cycle time to being a production manager in the factory with 180 people, doing a lot of lean improvements and starting the supplier quality group and a few other things, doing some global business planning for sites on 3 continents. And then that's when I went to McKinsey and I started doing some lean things, but at banks and non-manufacturing things. And since then, I've kind of gone back and forth between manufacturing and financial services. One noteworthy part was I was a lean champion at a private equity firm working with their manufacturing portfolio companies and putting that whole program in place of how to decide which companies to work with, and then going in and doing the analyses and getting them started on improvements. And now I'm an independent consultant, as you know.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, what's the first type of analysis you want to walk us through?
Let's do a couple quick ones. The one we mentioned before was about the production scheduling and demand alignment, right? So I think you've got that under operations. And that made me think of what's typically called the sales and operations planning process, SNOP or SIOP, sales inventory and operations planning, depending on how sophisticated you get at it. And this is actually one of my early McKinsey projects. It was at a manufacturer of basically cardboard boxes. It was a box plant. So they had the raw cardboard they bring in from the big, pulp plants and turn to boxes to sell. And what it turned out, so as we got into it, right, they wanted to increase their sales force effectiveness. And as we learned about it, it really became evident to us that the main issue is the different box plants had different equipment, and the different equipment was better suited to do certain types of boxes. But they didn't align that with the company-wide goals of how they were incentivizing the sales guys. But the sales guys were tied to individual plants. So there's a lot of analysis that went into this, but the main idea of it is, hey, if this is what's going to make your plant the most money, that should be aligned with how you're incentivizing your sales team, right? So it's really, I'm integrating what I'm telling the sales guys and what I'm going to produce. It's really got to be that alignment and match, and that's based on the equipment you have and how well you're able to produce things at what profit margins. A lot of the products you didn't have a lot of pricing. This is somewhat commodities, right? So it's not like you could, well, if I'm going to sell more of this and it costs us more, I can charge more. Well, maybe not, and it depends on. You get into all the other value-added things you're doing for them, right? If you're vendor managed inventory and those kind of things that are value-added services, you can charge a premium for. But the main thing is just aligning what they're trying to sell with what your equipment is set up to make the most money at.
Yeah. Now, this production scheduling, I guess earlier in my life, I might have thought that it's somewhat straightforward, but then my second or third project as an independent consultant, this was back in 2009, I served a company that makes this specialty cleaner. And let's say it comes in a tablet form, and it comes in liquid form, and comes in powder form. Yeah, and they had over 100 SKUs because they would sell both their own brand, but they would also co-brand it. So, and when they co-branded it, they'd have a different label on the jar,
Mm-hmm.
and they had 4 different production lines, and they could be producing just jars of powder, jars of tablets. The tablets were different sizes, and so what seems like something that should be kind of trivial, like you get orders, you schedule it out, became this massively complex thing because you want to make your changeovers as easy as possible. So
Mm-hmm.
when they change from one product to another, you try to keep the jar the same, or if you're doing tablets, maybe keep the same tablet but put it in a different jar. And in some cases, you would have orders come in, but you're stocked out of one particular thing, like you don't have the label, or you don't have the jar, or you don't have the lid, or you don't have whatever something. So there'd be that would be thrown in, and then sometimes you'd get an order in that was like super urgent from an important customer, and you needed to fit it in. So it became this like it was this massively complex 8-dimensional chess game to figure out how you wanted to schedule the production. And that was just one plant, relatively simple company. Um, what are the tools that companies use that are larger with multiple plants with even more complex situations? How do they do this production scheduling?
Yeah. So you've an example you just mentioned, or even a simple level, right? Obviously, that's not a one piece flow type of product. You're going to do them in batches.
Mm,
You're going to have you got equipment changeovers for the size of jars or the size of tablets or powder, whatever whatever the. It's a part of it depends on the flexibility of your equipment as to and how quick you can do the changeover as to what's an economic batch size, right? And you don't want to
right.
make a bazillion of it and have a ton of it and sitting in inventory when then you've got orders for the other part. Depends on whether you're also doing make to stock or make to order, right? Do you have if you have finished goods that are not custom or that you're pulling from, and then letting the demand from that pull tell you when to make more. But here you obviously had some private label stuff that was not going to be
Right.
make to stock, right?
Yeah, some of their stuff was make to stock, some was make to order. Some
Yeah,
things were multiple steps, so you had to first press the tablets. First, you had to make the powder, then you had to press the tablets, then you have the tablets, then you fill the
yeah,
jars with the tablets, and like multiple steps. You can't press the tablets too far in advance because if you at least leave them out and open, they're going to absorb all this moisture and stick together. You got to throw
right.
them away.
Yeah, well,
So,
how much can you build to a certain point and stock it at that kind of delayed customization, right? So I've got a bunch of tablets that I
right,
can store for a certain amount of time. I can have a certain volume of those, and then I'm just putting into the different person's jars, or
right.
the jars get a different label at the end, but they're already in a jar. So how much can you do? How long can you delay the customization? Is another one of the
Yeah.
aspects I think was mentioned somewhere
So
in the document as well.
how would you do an assessment or analysis if you're walking into a factory of their kind of production scheduling and know if it's good or not? Like, what would the things be? Would it be the number of changes in the schedule over time, or you know their overall on-time delivery? Like, how would you analyze it?
Yeah, certainly you're going to look at on-time delivery. That's what it comes down to. And then, but what inventory are you having to hold to be able to do that, right? So your inventory turns and how much you've got tied up in inventory. Uh, Walking out onto the production floor, right? Is there a visible schedule for how I know what's doing next? Do I have piles of inventory waiting in certain places because, and if so, is that because that's a bottleneck stop? Is that because there's a quality problem and that's all on hold, or because there's equipment downtime, or because the schedule didn't match up from the pre-production stops to the middle production steps? So you can learn a lot just from walking out and looking, even without asking any questions, right? Just what's visible. Where do you see stuff piled up? Do you see any visible metrics, schedules, anything like that, right?
Tell me a war story of something that you've seen when you've walked around a plant. What are some good things you've seen or some bad things that you've seen?
Oh, there's so many stories here. So why don't I tie this in with one of the ones we were gonna talk about?
All right.
So this is when I was back at American Capital, and one of the portfolio companies was a silver products manufacturer, basically silver jewelry and belt buckles, like for rodeo guys. And going through the production process and there's just piles of stuff in a lot of places. And there's bins of inventory that some of it's got so much dust on it, it hasn't been touched in a while, right? And then you talk to the operators and, why is this stuff here? Well, we had a stock out of this part, and so this whole batch is sitting here, right? Or these two are bad, so this whole tray of 20 is stuck there until we can fix the other two because we have to move a whole work order together, right? Or, so some of your own handicapped by your own processes in some places, right? If I can only move stuff in batches because that's how you're tracking inventory, and if one's bad and it holds up the rest of the batch, right? So there's ways around that too, aside from smaller batches. But there was stuff all over. I mean, you could tell there was lots of inventory lying around, and lots of stuff waiting to go in. And if you couldn't exactly tell, okay, wait, this stack is this stuff that's waiting to go to this place or waiting to go to that step, right? It's not clearly, people knew there, but if you walk through, you would say, okay, I just see lots of stuff, but I don't know where it's going. It's not very visual. There weren't many, posted metrics for quality or output or delivery and there should be not just for the plant, those should be like within each kind of cell, right? They should know what they're coming down the pike. As opposed to, oh, here's the next batch that showed up and here's the trailer on it. That's what I'm going to do next. That might be appropriate in certain situations, but in general, you're scheduling a certain number of things and you should know how long it takes to get through. Now, I knew going in here, they'd said one of their main problems was their lead times had gotten really long. So knowing that, I expected to see a lot of stuff sitting around, right? If you start to take the inventory out of the process, your lead time is going to shorten because stuff is going to be waiting so long at each step.
So in terms of the production scheduling piece, when you're walking around the plant, you like to be able to see somewhere the production schedule is visible so everybody knows what it is, so they know what's up next for their line and they can be prepared for it.
Yes, and that exactly always back to, well, if I need, depending on the industry, right? If I know I'm going to have a change where I need a technician to come reset this equipment, that's another, right? And it's not just the operator there who is able to do it. And some equipment is complicated enough you need that, right?
Right.
So that's got to be planned. You can't just, we're going to do this next, see if Joe's around to go fix the, then it just, time gets lost. So, and then it goes all the way back to do I make sure I have the materials and stuff too, right? There were times that when I first started Motorola, where we had, they would bring out pallets of material for the next batch of whatever model we were going to run. We were making the batteries and chargers for two-way radios and cell phones and stuff. And if you, opened all that up and got it out and then realized one part was missing or this batch from the supplier was bad, well, then you're stuck. There's a lot of delay while they go get the next whole, what was going to run next, and they go get that whole pallet of stuff because the material wasn't, out near where it's going to get used. It was like pre-kitted somewhere else without being checked that it was all that, before we had a supplier quality group, we'll get into that in a minute too. But so let's go back to the silver products, right? So you got material all over the place, right? But you find out that despite that, they're having stock outs, they're in quality problems. But one of the main pain points was stockouts, right? So, what we ended up doing, and we were able to take out 80% of the WIP in 2 months.
WIP meaning work in progress.
Work in process, yes.
Yeah.
Which
80%. Wow.
If you take out 80%, so you've got stuff waiting before, let's say there's 5 steps in a process, and you've got a bunch of stuff waiting between steps, aside from some other stuff that's waiting off to the side because it's waiting for a part or waiting to be fixed. So it takes a long time to work through all that, right? So if you reduce that by 80%, things are going to be waiting a whole lot less. A lot more of your time is just value-added time. And instead of taking, a week to get through the process, you're going to get through in a day.
Yeah. Right.
So that does a lot for your on-time delivery numbers, your predictability, all those. And we basically put in, I did it with a whole analysis of all the inventory they had out there, right? Everything that they had out on the floor. What's the actual demand for that stuff? Something you find out is, okay, we haven't used this in 6 months and you've got 3 shelves of it. Okay, what's your plan to deal with the excess and obviously inventory, right?
Let's talk
versus
about
the stuff that's needed a lot, and you can see the volumes and what you've been selling. Okay, well, if that's the case and this is as much as I needed, I know if I'm going to we put in basically a 2-bin system. We created Kanban cards. And when the operator finished a bin of something, they would take the Kanban card and it went in the little mailbox and it went to purchasing. And purchasing would know that's when I need to go order more.
Okay.
So it went all the way back to the supplier, right? It wasn't just, here to the material handler, go bring me stuff from the back. But after that, but it would also someone just went right to purchasing, right? Mm-hmm. And so they would know that you've just used this much. And when you do that, and so you've always got that second bin, right? We just eliminated the stockouts. I mean, it's amazing how quick it happens. And you do a new process like that, especially in manufacturing, when you're talking about training someone on a new process, right? The change management part of it. You don't do it a week ahead of time or 2 weeks ahead of time. You do it, hey, as of today, this is what's happening, right? This is what we're doing. When you come in tomorrow, this is what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, we're going to get together and show you the new process, and that's how we're going to operate, right? And so here's how it's set up, right? Here's what's going to go. And now when you do this, you finish to take the last one out of this bin, you're going to put this card here, and that's going to make sure that you don't, right? If you see these cards lying around, someone didn't do their job, and then no one knows that you need to order more, and then you're going to have a stock up. But that's just another example too. The first time you listen to someone, what they told you one of their main problems were, and you did something that made their job easier. They don't have stockouts anymore. They don't have all the extra stuff to look through and find out where's the one they need. People become a fountain of ideas, of improvement suggestions that they've had bottled up for years that either were never listened to or they didn't think anyone would listen. And it's amazing how quick morale can change too, right? If you a couple quick wins like that, someone felt listened to, you made their job easier, they're your friend.
On stockouts, how did you do the analysis to, first of all, identify that was a problem? And then how did you go about doing the analysis to figure out how much inventory should be held on hand? Because some things I would imagine have like relatively steady usage, right? Okay, I use 100 units per month and it takes a month to order them. So, okay, I need to have, I don't know, whatever, 200 on hand, etc. But some things they might be, well, we go for 8 months, we don't use it. And then boom, we might get a big order and we have to get, 500 units of this. But it's somewhat unpredictable. So there might be some things that with steady demand where it can be very, you can figure out how much to hold. And how did you kind of go about doing the analysis to avoid stockouts? But if you never have stockouts, you probably have too much inventory, right? Like
you definitely look at it. It's like everything else. It's the 80-20 kind of rule, right? All your stuff, all your big runners, you want to make sure you don't run out of, and some of the special order stuff. I think they're custom orders. You're not as worried about because they're custom and they expect it to take longer. But we looked through the last year's demand, or maybe we looked at 2 years demand and whether it was seasonal or not too for the parts we were looking at and what was, and then there's formulas I don't have off the top of my head, but there are formulas to use to so if you're going to do 2 bins, how much should you have, and based on the lead time from each of the suppliers too, right? So it's not just the demand, but it's what's the lead time from the supplier, so that I make sure that I'm ordering in time to replenish before the last bin runs out, right?
Right.
And building a little buffer, and you can always cut back on that, but we wanted to start out making sure, we had it covered. You can always dial it back a little bit. Okay, I'm going to make the bins a little smaller, or make the order quantity smaller if you need to. But
okay,
yeah. Right. So there's definitely math behind it. It's not just put 2 bins. How big a bin?
Great. You mentioned supplier quality evaluation. Let's talk about that a bit. This was program, right? Supplier quality management. I think that you started and ran a program like that.
When I started with Motorola, it was a new plant here outside of Atlanta, and all of a sudden we've got 700 people in the plant, and they've started up these production lines, and they were having a lot of problems with bad material. Like they would catch it when it got to the line, and then they'd have the line would be shut down while they went and figured out what they've got to make next instead. And they didn't have a process in place it was a new plant. They didn't have a supplier quality group set up yet or anything. So I got tasked with starting that up. And I didn't get to have 3 or 4 supplier quality engineers like I wanted to. I had one. And a couple of technicians that were really focused on making sure parts were qualified for new products before we released them to production. And and we implemented an incoming inspection for parts that were identified as having problems, and a processes by which you could basically suppliers and individual parts would earn their way back to dock to stock status, right? If you never had a problem with something, you don't want to spend any time inspecting it. You want to make sure once it comes in, it goes straight to stock and it's ready for when the line needs it.
I just wanted to say that again. I love that. That was dock to stock.
Dock to stock, right? So it comes from the dock. I can put it right into stock. It's ready to use. And there's problem parts that you've got problems with that. I mean, in a really bad situation, and if it's that critical a part, you may inspect 100% for a bit until you've figured out what the problem is and gotten it fixed. But then you move to a sample size, right? I'm not going to look at 100% of every part coming in for certain things. And then based on the results of your sample and what you're finding in the line, you can earn it back to dock to stock status. But you have to set up that process of, hey, there's a process of this, hey, I find something on the floor. How do I make sure that material is quarantined and put somewhere where it's not getting used again and no one's trying to use it? What's the process for this? Usually it's called a CAR, corrective action request, right? Or a SCAR, supplier corrective action request. How do I make sure, what's that process for working with notifying the supplier and working with them to fix the problem? And the type of parts we had the most problem with were plastic housings, for the batteries and stuff. They'd be like ultrasonically welded at the end with the batteries and flex circuits inside. And those would be some of our biggest issues. And so that's okay. We're going to focus on one commodity first. I got one engineer. You're going to become an expert in plastics. And you would go and visit those suppliers and understand what the problems were and work with them to fix the issues.
Okay, this is very interesting. So it's not we're just going to inspect everything that's coming into the plant on an equal percentage basis. It's really trying to figure out what are the parts that are causing us problems, and then which are the suppliers that are causing us problems. So it might be for one type of part, maybe one supplier is dock to stock. Okay, supplier X, they're doing great. Supplier Y, for that same part, we'll inspect them. So it's actually quite sophisticated. The intake dock, workers, who are the intake people, really need to know. So there has to be a system in place so they know. So they know
whether it goes to income inspection or goes right to stock. Exactly. Yeah. And then for the inspectors, they need to be trained out. Well, what am I actually looking for on this part, right? And if it's a certain aspect of this part that's bad, that's what they're looking for. They may be looking at the rest of it, right? Because it's way too costly, obviously, to inspect 100% of everything coming into a plant. And so ideally, you don't have to have much of an incoming inspection. But when you have problems, that's, it's an interim solution until you get the problem resolved or get a supplier that can better deliver you quality parts where you don't need to inspect them coming in.
So if you were going in to assess a manufacturing plant, how would you go about assessing their supplier quality management program? What are the things that you would be looking for? What would you be wanting to see?
Well, I'd want to understand what supplier quality metrics they had in place and how
what are some typical metrics?
Well, it's usually parts per, what percent is bad, right? What percent is good, 1%. And if you're never finding anything bad, that's great. Now, sometimes I guess you may not find out it's bad until you get a warranty return. You found out that the reason was we didn't catch it in the manufacturing process, but there's actually something bad in this. So that's the worst kind of defect, right? If the customer catches it. But they've got to have some kind of supplier quality metrics, wherever they're catching it, whether they're catching it. Do they have an incoming inspection, and are they catching stuff there? What kind of sampling regimen do they have? How do do they have a way to earn dock to stock status, right? Or if they find problems in the factory, how do they quarantine that material and make sure it's set aside, and how is that dealt with supplier, and how is supplier notified, and do you have people dedicated to work through those kind of issues with your suppliers? So it's how do you have this process in place to make sure the bad parts don't get to the line? And are you tracking the metrics associated with what you do find it gets to the line, or if you've got an incoming inspection, how you need to be tracking what you're finding to know whether you can decrease the samples that you're inspecting or take them off of inspection, or whether you have to go the other direction or start looking at different suppliers.
There's a lot of communication that has to happen. So the people on the production line need to communicate to someone who's running the program that when a given part is bad or a whole set of parts is bad, they have to put it into some system. Then the incoming, receiving clerk needs to be able to know what's in that batch and what the supplier was, what the parts are, and then they have to know which ones to flag, and then they have to communicate, oh, we have some here that need to be inspected to the inspector. The inspector, if they identify issues, you need to track that, and then you need to communicate that back to the supplier. So it's really very communication intensive.
Yeah, and your system should be able to handle a lot of that, right? Within the system, right? There should be a flag on and off for whether it goes to incoming inspection, right? So when they receive it, they see the flag, they know it goes there versus just putting it into its stock location.
Yeah.
And then within incoming inspection, then they've got to be able to know, okay, for the parts that I'm inspecting, what am I actually looking for, right? And then where am I tracking and keeping track of the what we're finding for that supplier? That's got to be in a system that is accessible, and you regular reports out back to the supplier and all those kind of things.
Okay. So
hopefully you're not just dealing with Excel sheets anymore, right?
Yeah. And so I imagine that most manufacturing ERP systems would have a module for this.
Yes, they should.
Yeah. Okay.
Because this was a while ago when we were doing this, and there was certainly I don't think we had all of it in terms of the level of, but we were getting there. We definitely had the flags for what was inspected and what wasn't, and whether it was cleared, and if stuff was put on hold.
How would you look at material handling and internal logistics efficiency? I guess that would entail both the Kanban that you talked about, as well as trying to minimize the number of touches that you have on a piece of work in progress type of inventory, right?
Yeah, so I mean, some of that comes down to your overall plant layout, right? Where's the stuff comes in the dock? Where is your incoming warehouse? Is it right there by the dock? Is it different from the outgoing dock? Where is an external warehouse? Or how are parts presented to the line, right? So how do they get from your incoming warehouse to where they're used in the line? Are there storage bins out in the line, right, where the stuff is used, or do they have to bring out big kits of stuff? Or is it, I mean, if you're doing big stuff, like, I did my graduate internship at a Carrier air conditioning, big chiller plant, right? So you're talking about these huge units that go in the basements of buildings, right? For air conditioning. And they would, there was a whole back shop where they would fabricate the lower level parts, and then the final assembly line where you'd be basically welding all this stuff together, right? So these were huge units that move with cranes, right?
Right.
And actually, if we can get to, that's a whole other example of metrics gone awry, right? If you're measuring the wrong things, because if you're measuring some of the traditional cost accounting practices of efficiencies and variances and things, and you may going to do all the wrong stuff. This is actually worthwhile. This example actually had to do with the plant manager was getting measured on what they called absorption, which is basically how much overhead he could absorb based on their cost per unit, right?
Okay.
So their incentive at the end of the month was to get as much stuff out the door as possible. They called it managing from the paint booth, because they didn't own the finished goods inventory. That was owned by marketing. So they'd get everything they could out the door. At the end of the month, the line would kind of be stripped. You've got this bunch of stuff sitting out in the parking lot. And then when you finally got an order for it, you had to bring it in and do some rework on it, because usually there's some customization involved, or a minimum probably had to be repainted because it's been sitting outside. And this is out in Syracuse, so the weather in the winter wasn't great. But that was marketing's problem, not the plant manager. So, and then since the line was stripped, right, then the next month, right, you didn't get anything out the first couple of weeks because you've got to start to build up stuff some new because you kind of stripped the final assembly line, as opposed to measuring on-time delivery, productivity, inventory quality, right? So that's where traditional costs, some traditional measures can go. It's like what you're measuring. That's the measurement. That means nothing to the guy down on the factory floor, right? How is he measuring what he does? Aside from the fact that there were no visible schedules, this place had 40 people whose job title was expediter. So that tells you there's a problem, right? 150 different job codes in the union contract.
what's the next analysis you'd like to cover? I think we have time maybe for one more.
Yeah, sorry. So let me go back to another Motorola example. This is when I was a production manager. So I had 3 shifts, about 180 people over 3 lines, and we went about really implementing some lean improvements to improve quality and throughput and cost. They all go together. And we did several lean things that kind of tools that kind of all work together to make this happen. And it touches on some of the things we've talked about. One is WIP, right? So people are in an assembly line and someone would keep just working and do as much as they could, right? And things would pile up between them and the next station. And if the next station was having a problem, they would get a bunch of stuff built up waiting for them, right? We taped off areas and said, okay, you got no more than 5 batteries. You can do no more than 5 units. And if that person is delayed and there's 5 there, you stop. And people, just the concept of, wait, I should stop? How am I going to get more out if I just stop and wait, right?
Yeah.
And we had some training involved in this too. And then part of it is, okay, just trust me, let's try it 2 days. Let's try it for a day. And just that alone helps you get more out, because when you do find a problem, you only have 5 maybe to rework, not 25 or 30 or however many piled up, right? So it improves quality, which therefore improves your throughput for the day. We did things like putting in fixtures that even if they took a little more time to get something into this fixture and jig than if you didn't use it, we made it so it's very difficult to do it wrong, kind of mistake proofing the problem, like pokey-okey. So if you put in this fixture, there was only one place you could weld this, and it was going to be in the right place. Because if it fit in the fixture right, there was only one hole to do the weld in. If you did it by hand, you might be off a little bit, and then that's going to affect it 2 steps down the line. Right? So now, if that's something like that means you have to rebalance the line a little bit because this station is now taking longer, and we'll take the second task that station did and move it to the next station. You did some of that too. But just those kind of few basic things, minimizing the WIP, putting the process of what you do when there's a problem, and if there's a quality issue, I need to stop, and the whole line's going to stop soon because you don't want to just keep building up stuff. Because maybe I'm having a problem at the ultrasonic welding station because 5 steps back where they're putting this together, there's an extra bulge that shouldn't be there because they weren't doing something right. So you have that visibility and communication throughout the line. But just by minimizing the WIP, giving them rebalancing the line a little bit, putting in fixtures and make sure you can only do things right, we just really had some huge, and we had quality, metrics and quality and output metrics up at the end of the line. We celebrate new records. There were a lot of pizza parties. And these are lines that had like 5 different languages spoken on them. People ages like 18 to 60. This is not like the lines at our Malaysia plant, which were all women within a 20-year span, right? That's just the way they set they can advertise that way in Singapore, right? Or in Malaysia. So this is a very diverse set of people with a lot of different languages spoken, but celebrating victories together, because we've shown them a new way to do things. We've given them the tools to do it, let them see for themselves that it works. And again, it's amazing how quick morale can go up as well. You're setting new records every few days, and we're able to decrease headcount too in some cases, because you didn't have as many people doing rework and things like that. Now this is a bigger plant. We had plenty of turnover, so we didn't have to lay people off, thankfully, but you didn't have to go hire more people, which was great.
Amazing. Jonathan, this is a great overview. For listeners that want to follow up with you, and where would you point them online?
I do not have my own website, so I am on LinkedIn.
Right.
Jonathan D. Schwartz under the linkedin.com/in/Jonathan D. Schwartz.
All right.
Or you can get me at jonathanschwartz13@gmail.com.
All right. Well, we will include that link in the show notes. Jonathan, thank you for joining today.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate it.
And listeners, once again, you can find this resource on the Umbrix website, umbrix.com/resources, and then scroll down to how to analyze a manufacturing company. Resource walks through 47 different analyses with data required, step-by-step instructions, and how to analyze the results. And thank you for listening.